Thank you, Jamie. Yeah, so thank you very much for everyone for joining us today for this day 3 of the Species Recovery and Management Ancient Trees and Woodland Programme. We've got a packed schedule ahead of us with lots of interesting talks. Now, before I go on, ancient trees, historic wood pasture and parkland are some of our most exciting and interesting habitats we have in the UK. Say that again, sorry. These habitats of ancient trees support an astonishing variety of wildlife in the UK. Around 2,000 species depend on ancient trees, a huge variety of insects. My big interest are beetles, and we have about 650 species alone of beetle that rely on ancient trees. 650 species representing about 53 different families. So if you're interested in insects and you want to get a good idea of diversity of these animals in this country, then dead wood, ancient trees are the place to look, really. You can sort of forget, these trees can seem really invulnerable and also almost like a sort of fixture of the landscape. But their habitats and the wildlife they support are threatened and in decline. One of the greatest challenges that faces ancient trees is the age gap between the existing ancient trees and the ancients of the future. This age gap is a real concern, but then there's also other concerns such as climate change and tree diseases, which have an increasing effect on ancient trees in the UK. Now, if we don't do something to try and stem these challenges, to try and address them, it's very likely that a lot of that wildlife that is dependent on these ancient trees will decline hugely in the next decades, and some might even disappear from the UK entirely. So the integrated Back from the Brink project, which is led by Buglife in partnership with Plant Life and the Bat Conservation Trust, has been working with landowners and managers across 19 prestigious and ancient sites throughout England. Some of our most interesting sites for ancient trees. And today what we're going to do, we're going to be exploring some of the work that has taken place over the last 4 years, including some of the integrated approaches to managing habitat for multiple taxa, species recovery work, and the innovative approaches to bridging the ecological gap between ancient trees and the ancient trees of the future. In this first session, though, we're going to look at some of those integrated approaches to cross-taxa management, and I'll hand back to Jamie in a minute. But before I do that, I just want to go through some of the housekeeping notes. This is not the usual stuff you expect at a conference. I expect you're all going to know where the fire escape is and where the lavatories are and so forth. But some things you need to be aware of. If you have any questions during the sessions, please put those down using the live Q&A tab at the bottom of your screens. Try not to put them in the discussion forum. They can be moved across from there, but please use the live Q&A whenever you have a question. So whenever you have a question that occurs to you, pop it down there. And then at the end of each session, we'll have a Q&A session to close each session up. And then also you'll notice that when you're watching a talk, you can't use your microphone or your camera. Don't worry about this. The discussion forum again on the bar at the bottom, which you can use if you want to chat to other people in the audience. And then during the day we'll have a few breaks, and then we'll have an hour-long lunch break where we'll be able to see the exhibition that's going on for an hour as well. So without further ado, I'll hand back to Jamie Robbins from Buglife, who's going to give you more of an overview of the Ancients of the Future project.
Thanks, Ross. Hopefully without technical hiccups this time. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you a bit more about the Ancients of the Future project now that Ross kindly introduced. As you said, the Ancients of the Future project is one of those integrated habitat projects that I mentioned, led by Buglife in close partnership with Plant Life and Bat Conservation Trust. And a huge amount of project partners. I mentioned before about new ways of working and trying to find overlaps with how we can work with organisations. Well, the Ancients of the Future project has worked with dozens of different landowners, organisations, research partners, everything you can see on here from the People's Trust for Endangered Species, Woodland Trust, Ancient Tree Forum, British Lichen Society, and RSPB. And I'm not leaving out any others because of any sense of priority. It's just if I listed them, we'd be here all day. So what are we trying to do with Ancients of the Future? Well, firstly, it's a project that's looking at ancient trees and wood pasture and parkland. Wood pastures include some of our most iconic landscapes. They're what a lot of us would associate with there's sunny, open, grassy sites with mature, fantastic trees growing in the landscape. They're those relics of royal forests and wooded commons and deer parks. They are that relics of the past, really is the best way to describe them. But they include some of our most important ancient trees. Ancient trees themselves are something that we know people have a lot of affection for, but what we're trying to do is take that affection and make it a conservation priority. So some of these sites have ancient beech, oak, field maple and more that crucially have, even though they're still living, are going through stages of decay. It's very difficult. We have to think of life differently when thinking of things for an ancient tree, because many of these trees are part living and part dying at the same time. And it's this that provides a really important habitat for so much of our wildlife. So around 25% of the wildlife in these wood pasture and parkland habitats are associated with that decaying wood microhabitat. It might be that they're all often associated with various other habitats as well, associated closely with them, but 25% of species use that as part of their life cycle. So that's there's around 2,000 what we call saproxyltic invertebrates alone. So those are species associated with deadwood, and about 40% of these are rare or scarce. We'll talk about why that might be shortly. But across all taxa, we've got fungi, lichens, moss, flies, beetles. It's an enormous biodiversity associated with what is quite a small resource in our landscape. In fact, going back to this, we mentioned those primary and secondary species in the very early introduction. This Ancients of the Future project is trying to help 28 of those primary species and 38 of the secondary species, just to show how many of our rare species are associated with them. So yes, together with Plant Life and Bat Conservation Trust and that myriad partners, we're trying to secure the future for ancient trees in our landscape and the species that depend on them. So I said about deadwood at the beginning, the number of species associated with it, with dead and decaying wood habitats. It's a very complex area. We know that conservation land managers have got much better in the last few years at recognizing the importance of this deadwood resource. But there's much more to it than simply having dead wood for these the species we're looking at. As we'll find out in all of the talks today, they're all associated with very specific microhabitats, which are created by the course of their life, whether it's branches breaking off or lightning strikes, or simply parts of them starting to decompose through age, because many of these trees are hundreds of years old. But we're having to deal with a number of challenges with protecting these deadwood species. We've got a significant problem of knowledge, as we'll find out when we talk about the survey aspects of the Ancients of the Future project today, with Leah Mould from Buglife speaking. A lot of the time we don't know about the distribution of many of these species. Some of them are so rare they've only been seen a handful of times, and this helps to add to that mystique around them. We've got the royal splinter cranefly, which has only ever been found a couple of times in Windsor Great Park and once in Slovakia. So how do you look after something when you know so little about it, when you've got more questions than answers? And I mentioned about it being more than just having dead wood. There's different kinds of dead woods in different scenarios, which we'll also learn about today. How do you manage a site to make sure it's got all of these resources that can cater for such an enormous group of species? And that's the real key challenge of Back from the Brink and Ancients of the Future, is trying to bring the needs of so many rare different types of animal and plant together and manage for them on a single site. So we're going to use the word cross-taxa a few times today, and that's a really crucial approach here to try and make sure that our best sites are managed as well as they can for their rare wildlife. We've also got a problem, of course, that out of sight is out of mind. We've got these fantastically rare species, and land managers either may not know they've got them or may not know how to manage for them, so they often get overlooked when planning for a site. That's despite the fact that these ancient trees are themselves diverse habitats. We think land managers, this is something perhaps for land managers to get their head around today, is that ancient trees themselves are a habitat. They are within that wider parkland or woodland habitat, but they themselves are a habitat with so many niches and different associations within them. But some of the challenges will come up across when we talk about land management are things like the removal of trees due to health and safety. We're trying to overcome cultural impacts. So Alice Parfitt, again from Buglife, is going to be talking about how we're trying to issue management advice to help all these different species groups. And the big challenges we have with ancient trees is that we're running out of them. we've got these fantastic mature trees with so much wildlife depend on them. But due to neglect, so you may have woodlands where young trees are shading out our developing mature trees, our ancients of the future. It may be that we've also got a shortage of the youngest cohort coming through thanks to deer grazing. So the problem we've got is this age gap between our current veteran trees and the ones to come in the future. So today we'll be learning about how we can consider this in management planning. We're going to look at how RSPB, Sherwood Forest, they are managing to try and future-proof woodlands. That's a really important concept, is trying to develop those future ancient trees. But while we're trying to develop them, we also need to extend the life of the trees we've got and diversify the features they've got through veteranization, which again we'll find out about from Sherwood Forest, and from Izi Banton over in Sweden will tell us about her research on veteranization as well. So we're also looking at innovative ways at how we can bridge that gap between the future and the current trees. So we've got a really exciting session as well today, looking at all the innovative techniques such as fungal inoculation work we're doing with Cardiff University, and some deadwood habitat mimicry work we're doing with the University of East London, which is trying to provide the habitat that can often take decades to develop sooner. So it's all very exciting. There's lots to look at within the course of today. So I can't talk about ancient trees without showing off some of our wonderful project species. So again, the Royal Splinter Cranefly at the top there, I mentioned that one that's only been found a handful of times. We've also got the oak click beetle at the top right there, the violet click beetle on the bottom left, again, only found from, 3 sites, but 2 kind of woodland areas associated with trees in England, and the noble chafer as well. And away from invertebrates, we've got some fantastic lichen species to look at. We've got the eagle's claw, the sap groove, the geranium fire dot, which is now only found at the bottom left there, I think, on 2 ash trees in all of England. So one of the things we have to think about is how will we deal with trying to keep a species like that going in the face of ash dieback, for example. And over in the fungal corner, we've got oak polypore at the top, which is, again, an endangered species associated with exposed season wood of oak trees. And we've got the gilded dome cap as part of this project as well, which is now only known from 1 site, and I don't think we managed to find throughout this project either. So we've got some incredibly scarce wildlife with some really fantastic stories. And of course, we do still have some of the bigger charismatic stuff, the nocturnal bats, the lesser spotted woodpeckers as well. So it really is trying to take that cross-taxa approach. So as I said, we're trying to future-proof ancient trees and sites, both by maintaining the resources we've got and looking ahead. But we also want to make sure that it's more than just the sites we've got at the moment that we're trying to better manage. We want to produce this cross-taxa guidance, to provide to landowners across the country to make sure that they're managing for deadwood habitats as best as they can. We want to talk to the land managers nearby to our nationally important sites and make sure that they're trying to help improve that connectivity across the landscape by also looking at how they can manage their ancient trees and habitats. There's so much we're trying to do with this project. It's been hugely ambitious and hugely challenging at the same time. We'll find out more about that as well as the day goes on. And again, I said at the beginning that there's a lot of affection in this country for ancient trees and veteran trees as part of our landscapes. But we want to take it to a step more than that. We want people to associate with the wildlife with them. So as with all Back from the Brink project, there's been an element of community arts to it. There was an event with Ancients of the Future where we worked with people to create banners using natural materials from sites to show their support for ancient trees and the sites. And just simple arts and crafts is trying to bring people closer and find out more about wildlife. And if you missed it, when it's up, you can look at day 1 of our Back from the Brink conference, which really focused down on that people engagement element. I mentioned that the Ancients of the Future is a geographically spread project. Well, this here is a list of the sites that we're working on, and it includes some of our most iconic wildlife sites, with Windsor Great Park, Moccas Park, Sherwood Forest, really well-known sites, but also some lesser-known jewels of sites with fantastic biodiversity value that we're trying to protect. It's very difficult compared to some other Back from the Brink projects to really engage volunteers and train them in going out to do surveys with some of the species we're looking at here. If you've joined the other days, you'll have heard about mobilizing volunteers to improve recording and get them really engaged with species conservation. Of course, we mentioned some of these species are so rarely seen that we don't really know exactly where to find them or when to look for them. We've also got the added challenge of the fact that some of our species will have a very cryptic. Invertebrates and fungi and lichen have this awful habit of coming from groups with lots of other species that look just like them. So, but a lot of our volunteer recording in this project is focused heavily on working with bat groups in terms of using some innovative technology that Sonia Reveley from Bat Conservation will introduce later on today. But we've tried to use online training events to try and counter the COVID limitations to engaging landowners. We want people to manage the landscape better. We want arborists and tree workers to know all about the rare species we're working with. And we work with the People's Trust for Endangered Species by supporting the Great Stag Hunt. And whether it's a symptom of lockdown and people recording more, or the successful additional reach of the Great Stag Hunt with the Back from the Brink support, the numbers of records for stag beetles nearly doubled or tripled during the year we were involved, which is fantastic additional information to help recording. I'm not going to touch on much of the habitat works because that's kind of stepping on the toes of the fantastic work to come. But as I mentioned earlier, we're trying to conserve our veteran trees, restore that wood pasture landscape, also planting in trees to try and help future-proof certain sites where there's currently a lack of recruitment. And one of the things that's very important for invertebrates that often gets overlooked within this is we're talking about deadwood habitats and veteran trees. They often need that for just part of their life cycle. So what we're trying to really encourage on some of the sites is more nectar shrubs to help feed the adults during the limited part of their lives where they're out foraging and mating before laying eggs. So this is just very flyby examples of some of the veteranisation work that we're looking at. So it's trying to mimic features that previously were created by natural processes. The woodpecker hole at Sherwood Forest, you can see on the right there, we'll hear more of later, and mimicking horse damage. And it can be mimicking lightning strike. It's trying to resurrect dead wood. Again, there's an example at the bottom left there from the Crown Estate with Windsor Great Park of resurrecting standing dead wood by physically strapping it onto existing trees to try and give that standing wood more life. And again, this afternoon, we'll hear from our colleagues at University of East London and Cardiff University about all that innovative stuff they're trying to bridge that age gap and mimic those habitats that can take decades to be created, whether it's through our violet click beetle habitat boxes or inoculating trees with fungi, as we'll find out. And Dave Lammercraft from Plant Life is also going to talk about translocation efforts for the pox lichen. We think of translocations, I think our brains almost always go to water voles and amphibian and reptiles linked to development. But can we translocate something as sensitive as a lichen, which has very specific pH, bark requirements, and light requirements and air quality? So some really innovative and exciting stuff. Just going to wrap up in a moment. As I said, a key part of what we're trying to do with this work isn't just make sure our best sites are managed as well as it can be. It's also trying to get that knowledge out there. So with bat conservation, we run courses on arboricultural courses for bats, and we've run a series of workshops which you can find online at our Deadwood Hub. Here we go, which will be up this autumn. It will be there soon. Currently, you can find them on various places such as the Back from the Brink website as well as the Buglife YouTube page. We're going to have a dedicated Deadwood Hub that will contain that cross-taxa resource we're producing to help all sites be managed better, as well as all the videos and learning resources we're producing through the Ancients of the Future project. As well as various guidance sheets, species sheets, so we can try and spread the message for some of our rarest species in the UK, and signposts for additional resources, because we're aware that this is always going to be a playing field that changes with so many rare species and so much to learn. We'll always have to signpost to to new sources of information. And that's me. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to talking to you in the exhibition and question sessions later.
Excellent. Many thanks, Jamie, for that superb overview of the project. I think one point, to stress is that how little we know about some of these species. Obviously, the work going on, we're trying to figure out exactly where we find them. But one of the things that always occurs to me is just how little we know, especially for the insects, how little we know about their lives. I mean, there's enormous scope for discovery there in terms of, exactly where they live, what do they eat exactly, what things eat them. There's so much to discover still. But yeah, thank you very much for that. Superb. Now we're going to move on to Alice Parfitt, from who's a project officer at Buglife, who's going to be talking about integrated approaches to cross-taxa management. So Alice, take it away, please.
Today at this Back from the Brink Ancients of the Future conference. So yeah, my name's Alice Parfitt. I work for Buglife as a conservation officer, and in this talk I'm going to quickly go through some of the approaches we've used when integrating cross-taxa management of sites with ancient trees, with particular reference to one of the sites we've been working on, which is Mockers Park. So just very briefly, Mockers Park is in Herefordshire. It's 139 hectares. It's privately owned but managed by Natural England. And it consists of sort of one half is a sort of parkland dominated by open grown ancient oak trees. And then the sort of other half, sort of in the south and west, is a much more sort of natural wood pasture woodland. It's on a slope and has a mix of trees, including species such as field maple and horse chestnut, so a much more mixed species there. So one of the key steps in approaching cross-taxa management on sites is to get a grounding in which species are using the site. In this case, we're obviously talking about our ancient trees. And while this seems like a fairly obvious starting point, up-to-date information on what you have, where it is, what resources species are using on site. So that's the ancient trees. And just as Jamie mentioned, many of our invertebrates, for example, require other resources to complete their life cycle. And this sort of survey work can then identify gaps in knowledge, which obviously Jamie has just touched on as well, sort of whether there are any conflicts in species requirements and whether there are any overlaps in habitat requirements. And these can all be then considered in the management planning process. And at Mockers Park, we've been able to put quite a bit of effort into survey work and undertook a range of surveys on key invertebrates, bats, lichens and fungi. So I'll start off with our invertebrates. We've got two very rare invertebrates at Mockers, and I'll just touch on these very briefly, as I know my colleague Liam is going to talk about these in a bit more detail later on. But we have the Western wood vase hoverfly, Myolepta potens, on site, and this is only known from 2 sites in the UK, and it hadn't been surveyed at Mockers Park since 2002. So we were able to repeat this survey, but found just a very few, a small number of females on site confined to just 2 horse chestnut trees. So this is definitely one of those species that needs a bit more work on it to sort of fully understand all of its requirements. But what we do know is that they use horse chestnuts. They use the rot holes in horse chestnuts, which are filled with water. But we also, that's for their breeding, and we also know that the adults have a requirement, as many saproxylic invertebrates do, for nectar resources on site. Our other key invertebrate on site is the Mockers beetle, and this is only known from Mockers Park in the UK, so a really key species for the site. And this one requires veteran oak trees, and we were able to survey over several years of the project, and including in this picture on the right, using a cherry picker to get higher up into the canopy, and this actually proved to be quite a good way of recording them. So a nice sort of novel technique there as well. We were also able to carry out lichen surveys. So a team of lichenologists surveyed Mockers Park in 2018. Over 200 species recorded, with 60 new to the site. And it's one of the most important sites in Great Britain for its rich assemblage of lichens on old parkland and woodland trees. And it includes many of threatened and rare species, including some of our target species. So we've got oak rim lichen, Lecanora quercicola, which, as the name suggests, favours ancient oaks. And this was actually found new to the site. We've also got groove lichen, Basidia incompta, and this uses horse chestnuts. And we've also got lemon tart lichen, Lecanora sublevescens, and this there's probably at Mockers the largest population of this species in England, and this is a species that requires well lit trunks of old oak trees, and we've gained a lot more information on where this species is and how it's doing on site. And we also found a couple of new species to mock us through the surveys, one of which is the elm Gyalecta, which wasn't on elm at Mockers. It's actually found on a limestone rock outcrop on site. So lots of exciting discoveries found on site. We were also able to carry out bat surveys on the site using static acoustic recorders. We recorded 7 species, including 2 of our target species, the barbastelle and the noctule. And in one area of the park, there was significant barbastelle activity in one area, which suggests a maternity roost was nearby. And this is one of the species that requires a bit of sort of further work to locate those trees so that appropriate management, or in this case probably lack of disturbance in this area, can be undertaken. And we were also able to carry out fungi surveys on site and found oak polypore, which is one of our target surveys. And by obtaining good knowledge of species and where they were through the surveys, we can identify some of the needs of the species. We were able to look at some of the overlaps of the species requirements, possible conflicts, and I'll just sort of run through a few of those sort of key things now. So we found a really nice overlap of habitat requirements, or at least a partial overlap between the western wood vase hoverfly and the lichen Basidia incompta, as they obviously both use the horse chestnuts present at Mockers Park. So the hoverfly uses the water-filled sort of rot holes and crevices to breed in, and then the lichen is found on the trunk of the horse chestnut, where that nutrient-rich water has overflowed from those rot holes and down the trunk, and that's where the lichen was found. So that was a really nice overlap of those species requirements needing horse chestnuts. So we were able to sort of direct some of our management advice as to how to help both of those. But most of the species we found actually require open grown trees to support them. So the lichens, the Mockers beetle, the fungi in particular, and the bats as well. But they all like trees in varying shades of shading, so how open they are. The lichens, quite a lot of the lichens like really open trees, and then sort of the bats obviously like a bit more shelter around them. But all of the ancient trees all of the species require ancient trees that are allowed to age naturally and have had continuity of habitat over a long period of time. And so we're able to give some key recommendations to site managers on these. And if you're working with ancient trees, some of these will be very obvious ones. So allowing trees to survive and die naturally through slow woodland dynamics is really important. And also there is no need to carry out any tree surgery on ancient trees unless there is an imminent danger that that tree is going to fail, particularly if survey work has discovered that it has one of our particularly rare species. So generally no tree surgery work except in very specific conditions. Leaving timber in situ is a really well known one. This includes standing dead wood, fallen branches, etc., and leaving pieces in as bigger pieces as possible. The long-term continuity of habitat is really important, and potential age gaps have been mentioned already today. How to address those on site are really important. And whether the right trees are present. So we've already looked at a lot of the species that mockers require oaks, but then some require the horse chestnut. So making sure that there's the continuity of the right tree species, and also how that habitat is going to be maintained through the long term in grazing and browsing. Thinking about tree regeneration, where whether that will happen naturally, whether the grazing pressure will allow that, whether areas need to be excluded from grazing, or whether trees need to be planted. And then the other two things we sort of need to think about, which I'll talk about in a little bit more in the next couple of slides, are our nectar sources and also connectivity through the landscape. So some of the things we've been able to do at Mockers to look at the continuity of habitat, we were able to carry out some pollarding of fairly young trees. These are oak trees that were planted about 30 years ago. And we've pollarded these. There's not much of a history of pollarding on site, but we've pollarded these to sort of speed up that age process a bit and try and fill a bit of that age gap. And then we've been able to talk to the site managers about long-term continuity through grazing. So there's fallow deer on site, but it's also grazed by cattle, and that helps maintain that open parkland habitat in the long term. But as with any grazing scheme, need to keep an eye on sort of getting that level right so that nectar sources can flower, tree and shrub regeneration can occur, but without the ancient trees becoming shaded by excess vegetation. And this can actually be quite a tricky act. So at Mockers, we've been able to, as well as the pollarding of oaks, we've been able to do some work for the continuity of the horse chestnut resource. So we've planted some horse chestnut. So that's providing habitat, as I said, for the western wood vase hoverfly and the lichen. And we've also we know that nectar sources are needed on site, particularly for our invertebrates. So we've been able to plant some hawthorn, and we've planted this particularly close to the known western wood vase hoverfly trees, so that all of their resources are sort of in fairly close proximity to one another. And we've also been able to plant some nectar shrubs throughout the park of varying species. And this sort of brings us on to one of our sort of possible conflicts on site. So I mentioned earlier the lichen Gylecta almi, which was found on the limestone rock outcrop, and it was found there that actually hawthorn, so our nice nectar sources, are actually shading this lichen. But because we know the lichen is in that one place, we can target management to that very specific area, and so that's what we've been able to do, to carry out some small amount of scrub removal for the benefit of the lichen, while still promoting flowering shrubs through the rest of the park. And then if we think about landscape connectivity, if we just come back to the map of Mockers Park, we can sort of have a look at the landscape, and we can see that it's a fairly farmed landscape around the site, but there are small copses and hedgerow trees running through the landscape, particularly towards the east, and we've been able to do a bit of work with some of our neighbouring landowners to look at how they can manage that resource, so there are stepping stones through the landscape. And then just to the south of Mockers Park is Mockers Hill Wood, which is currently being restored to wood pasture, and that will obviously significantly increase the area of wood pasture within the landscape. So that's really sort of promoting wider landscapes, so all of both our species and their habitat are not in isolation. So very quickly, to summarise sort of key aspects, survey work is really, really important. So you know where what you have and where you've got it. Many of the species we are dealing with can be confined to just a very few trees. So really need sort of a bit of looking after in those instances. But more work is also required on quite a lot of our species at Mockus and throughout the Ancients of the Future sort of sites. Once you've got your survey work, you can look for overlaps and conflicts in species requirements or management, and can then target specific management for species in the right places. You can also ensure that long-term beneficial management of the habitat is in place, whether that's ensuring the next generation of ancient trees either are being planted or can regenerate naturally, or keeping an eye on grazing levels. And really, I think you've got the two things there of the really sort of targeted species work and the wider habitat work. And then finally, looking at landscape connectivity, so species don't become marooned on islands, and thinking about how we can buffer sites. So that's it very briefly from me. I hope that's been interesting, and obviously feel free to add some questions to the Q&A at the end of the session. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Fantastic overview. Particularly like all the information there on Mockus Park, which is a fascinating place. Now what we're going to do, we're going to go to Izi Banton and Carl Cornish, both from the RSPB. And they're going to be talking about bridging the gap through veteranisation. One tool in Sherwood's 500-year management plan. Izi, over to you.
Can you hear me? Can you talk me through what I need to do to share? Thanks. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Sherwood Forest. I'm Carl Cornish, RSPB Conservation Officer, and I'm the lead for the RSPB Sherwood Priority Landscape. I prepared the presentation with Izi Banton, RSPB Sherwood Reserve Conservation Manager, who will be joining me for the question and answer session. Firstly, I'm going to give some background information to the site and its management, and how the Back from the Brink's Ancients of the Future project has helped augment management interventions on site to secure continuity of decaying wood habitat. So where is Sherwood Forest? Hopefully you've all heard of it before because of its famous association with Robin Hood. So Sherwood Forest is situated in the East Midlands, and the RSPB Sherwood Reserve sits within the much larger Sherwood National Character Area of 54,000 hectares, which would have once been part of the much larger extent of the Sherwood Forest. And this area is also the RSPB's Sherwood Priority Landscape. And the red blob in the map on the right shows the location of RSPB Sherwood. Focusing in further, this is part of an area called the Berklands and Bilhaugh, and hopefully you can see the outline that shows the area managed by the RSPB, the purpley blue outline. The RSPB has been managing this 197 hectare site since August 2018, but Izi has been involved for longer as site manager when the site was managed previously by Nottinghamshire County Council. The green squares show the location of ancient oaks, and the red diamonds the location of the next generation veterans. And on the map, hopefully you can see these come up. Note the concentration of ancient and veteran oaks in the east of the site, a scattered distribution across the rest of the site, and very few in the northeast part of the site. And this wooded area is ancient wood pasture and is predominantly oak and birch. So the Berklands and Bilhaugh area is a nationally important area for ancient acidic wood pasture with a concentration of ancient oaks. Most of the ancient oak trees are 300 to 400 years old. They have a characteristic shape with retrenched and stag-headed crowns, so that's dead limbs in their crowns, few lower limbs, often twisted trunks, dead limbs, hollow cavities, and bosses on the trunks. It is a special area of conservation and a national nature reserve, and both these designations are underpinned by the whole area being a site of special scientific interest as well. So why is Sherwood important? RSPB Sherwood Reserve is of European and national importance for its population of ancient and veteran oak trees and their fauna associated with decaying wood. With surrounding areas, it has one of the largest populations of ancient and veteran oaks in the UK. These oaks support nationally rare invertebrate species that depend on decaying wood, known as saproxylic invertebrates. The site has both a favourable and nationally important saproxylic quality index and an index of ecological continuity for saproxylic invertebrate assemblages. It is in the top 12 sites in the UK for saproxylic invertebrates, and being in the East Midlands, as we saw earlier, has species at the northern and southern limits of their ranges. This shows some more of the Sherwood's amazing ancient oaks and a selection of its special species that depend on them, including some of the back from the brink's target species. As we've seen previously, we have oak polypore on this site, the rare cardinal click beetle, a spider known as Midiomydus, or the Midas tree weaver spider, and also we have lesser spotted woodpeckers as well. So why did we get involved with Back from the Brink's Ancients of the Future project? This presentation is mainly about why we became involved with the Ancients of the Future project, and is an introduction to the techniques we used. More detail on veteranisation will be covered later in Vicky's presentation. We got involved because the project offered us additional funding to help close the gaps in space and time in continuity of decaying wood features. Gaps caused by the scattered distribution of ancients and veterans across the site, as we saw in the earlier slide, and veterans and the age difference between the current ancients and future generations of ancients. How we went about that is first set in some management context, as the work is complementary to interventions undertaken for several years. So to give some management context, as custodians of Sherwood, our primary role is to ensure the long-term continuity of favourable habitat condition for key species. Our work is to keep what we have and create conditions for the future continuity of habitat. This requires a high level of management intervention to ensure the structural stability and biological vitality of the ancient trees and managing the wood pasture habitat for the future generations of open grown oaks. So the issues that influence our management on site are historic loss of wood pasture structure, both through natural regeneration and previous plantings within open spaces. The ancient trees suffering high levels of canopy and ground competition from surrounding vegetation, as the photo on the slide shows. Limited abundance of 200 to 300 year old oaks to form the next generation of ancient trees and associated decay in wood habitat, and ground vegetation management by cutting and grazing with cattle, and also mitigating and minimizing visitor impacts. We do this through a collaborative approach, working with Natural England and other organisations such as Ancient Tree Forum, together with specialists in different disciplines to maximise both funding opportunities and innovative ways of working, often trialling new techniques. Veteranisation is just one of these and is being used alongside our other management techniques that are working successfully. And so this is going to why do we need to intervene at Sherwood? A common question we often get asked is, why don't we just let the ancients do their own thing and collapse, as would have happened in the past? At Sherwood, like other sites across the country, the ancient oaks are a finite resource. There is an average loss of 1.77 ancient oaks per year, so the existing cohort and associated habitat here could be lost by 2243. There is also the risk of the rate of loss increasing with climate change if we have more extreme weather events, such as storms. Keeping them alive or standing for as long as possible whilst the next generation plays habitat catch-up is our main focus for management intervention. Without that, we risk losing the site's special wildlife. Sherwood is important as even though we are missing a generation of trees following past clearances, we are able to identify and recruit trees to follow the ancients and, in time, become ancients of the future. Veteranisation is complementing, not replacing, the work we are doing with the ancients and next generation trees by accelerating the formation of decay features in the younger generation of trees, following on behind these two age cohorts to ensure there will be a continuity of old trees to support the nationally important Zaproxylic invertebrate assemblage. The photo shows a failure in an ancient oak with the collapse of standing red rot, the important habitat within decaying trees for Zaproxylic invertebrates. The three complementary approaches to management we use are: 1, keep what we have through interventions to ensure the survival of standing ancients. This photograph shows two bands being put around a trunk to stop it splitting and the loss of the standing red rot, as we saw in the previous photo. We're also managing the habitat as a whole to create the space for ancients of the future to develop over time. So this shows an open oak in a grazing compartment. And now, since early 2020, we've been starting to use veteranisation as well, which is using tools to speed up natural processes. And this photograph shows a lightning strike created on a younger tree. So what is veteranisation? Veteranisation is a nature conservation tool which can be used on sites with age gaps and fragmentation. It accelerates the formation of microhabitats and decay features in young trees without killing them, using tools to replace time. Such features are usually only found on older trees as part of natural processes that can take decades or longer to develop, as we've heard in some of the earlier presentations. The techniques mimic the damage caused by animals, for example, horse kicks and woodpecker holes, or weather events, for example, lightning strikes. These features are liable to fungal colonization and the creation of decaying wood habitats. They also create cavities used by bats, birds, and invertebrates. An important message is that veteranization should never be carried out on trees that are already veterans. Izi and me and other RSPB colleagues, we attended Vicky's excellent veteranization course held at the nearby National Trust, Clumber Park. This course was funded by Louise Hackett of the Woodland Trust, who we work closely with as well. It was invaluable in helping us identify suitable trees for veteranization at Sherwood. We worked as a team with RSPB ecologists, our external ARB consultant Luke Steer, and the wonderful ARB contractor Reg Harris and his team from Urban Forestry to select 3 suitable trial locations. These are shown by the yellow circles on the map. The sites were selected because, 1, they had suitable trees for veteranization, which were younger trees under 100 years old with no or few existing veteran features. 2, they were areas where there were fewer ancients or veterans, so increasing the extent of decaying wood habitat. And 3, were visible from visitor paths, so we can plan for a future decaying wood walk. So this slide shows the 5 standardized techniques that were replicated at the 3 trial sites at Sherwood. So the 5 standardized techniques are, so 1 shows a lightning strike, as we've seen earlier. So this is a cut through the bark and into the heartwood from the top of the trunk, spiraling down to the ground. 2 shows a woodpecker hole, a small cavity. 3 is horse damage, so removing the bark from part of the base of a trunk. 4 is a nest box, a deeper cavity cut into the trunk of the tree. And 5 is aerial ring barking. Hope you can see that through the yellow arrows, which is used to create aerial decaying wood up in the crown of the tree. All were created by an ARB contractor working at height with a chainsaw, except the horse kick damage, which was created using a sledgehammer. As mentioned earlier, these veteranization techniques mimic the impacts of animals and weather, which create microhabitats, cavities, and features liable to fungal colonization and wood decay. And these all show work that was carried out on site in February 2020. Vicky will talk a bit more about her official veteranization trial program later today, but we're not part of the veteranization trial program. Therefore, we were able to let the ARBs unleash their inner creativity. So this slide shows 3 of the non-standardized techniques. Slide 1 is, unsurprisingly, called the Eiffel Tower. So the base of the trunk has been cut out, leaving the tree standing on buttresses. This is mimicking an effect sometimes caused by the oak bracket fungus, which I'll attempt to give you the scientific binomial, Inornotus dryadius, which has sometimes also been called the Eiffel Tower fungus. 2 is erecting an aerial cavity and water pocket on a standing monolith. The monolith was created as part of the high competition pruning work around one of the ancient oaks, so we're combining veteranization with other management interventions. And 3 is a whole trunk aerial cavity. Obviously, many of these techniques require specialist skills and can be expensive, making them beyond the scope of most site managers' budgets. But thanks to innovative projects such as Back from the Brink, funding streams can provide opportunities to trial techniques and hopefully provide inspiration to others of what is possible. This just is another photograph of a trunk cavity that was created on site and shows sort of the multi-taxa approach to some of these features. So this is a trunk cavity near the base of a tree trunk. It also has other features incorporated. So slits have been cut into the interior roof as bat resting or roost sites, and the base of the cavity cut into a bowl to hold water. Some flies associated with veteran trees have an aquatic larval stage, as Alice mentioned in her presentation. Each of the treated trees has, like our ancients and next gens, been tagged and GPSed and will form part of the reserves monitoring programme. This is Izi with our ARB contractor Reg Harris. On an initial look at some of the veterinised trees a couple of weeks ago with a beetle expert, we found a Zaprozilic beetle called Dryocoates villosus on one of the lightning strikes. So this shows the beetle on the Coleopterus hand to give an idea of scale. So this is a weevil. It's not a rare beetle, but it shows that created features are already being visited. Sorry, that's the name up there for you as well. I've just included this slide because I found it quite interesting. This shows a nest box created at chest height. So the newly created nest box is shown on the left, and we see the same nest box 14 months later on the right, and you can see through the yellow arrows where wound wood has formed around that cut. So we can see sort of the reaction of the tree to that veterinised feature. The other habitat creation technique being trialled as part of the Back from the Brink project is the installation of 10 beetle boxes to act as artificial stand-in decaying wood for Zaprozilic invertebrates. Steph Skip will talk later today more about beetle boxes in her presentation. We discussed our ideas with Nicholas Jansen, who has undertaken research on beetle boxes, and Ted Green, who pioneered their use at Windsor Great Park for violet click beetle, a species that does not occur at Sherwood, where we're currently too far north of its UK range. With our high number of visitors, we felt that using hollowed out trunks would blend in more than the timber boxes used on other sites and be more robust. These hollowed out trunks will be filled with a mix of sawdust and organic chicken poo. We will monitor the contents of the boxes to see if they need refilling. Again, the boxes will be tagged and GPSed for monitoring. We're also going to install one near our visitor centre in our nature garden and have a perspex viewing screen in the lid, so as part of the interpretation for the project. This map just shows where the beetle boxes are going with the yellow circles, and we chose these areas because there were fewer ancient oaks in those areas, and to see if the beetle boxes could help provide additional habitat for Zaprozilic invertebrates, and could they help provide habitat continuity across the site and out to neighbouring areas. So in thinking about in terms of next steps for the work we've undertaken as part of the Ancients of the Future project at Sherwood, obviously our work's only a year or so old at the moment, so we need to do some invertebrate surveys. So we plan to start some vein trap surveys next year on the veterinised trees to find out what is using them and to develop and undertake sampling of the beetle boxes. The RSPB Reserve is a key demonstration site for the Sherwood Priority Landscape and beyond to demonstrate the management of ancient wood pasture and interventions to provide continuity of stand-in decaying wood habitat. We are also developing a decaying wood walk along one of the existing visitor routes. We also have some Back from the Brink funded interpretation to install on site. The interpretation will use logs showing some of the veterinisation techniques. They will be installed close to the main visitor path next to an interpretation panel to illustrate what we are trying to achieve and why. Together with the beetle boxes and a decaying wood trail, we are hoping to actively engage with the visitors and introduce them to the hidden world of Sherwood. We will be working with land managers and partners, especially Woodland Trust, to improve our knowledge of the distribution of ancient trees across the Sherwood landscape and undertake measures to improve connectivity between key sites. Louise Hackett at Woodland Trust has commissioned guidance from Vicky on how to undertake and monitor veterinisation at a landscape scale in Sherwood. And this is my final slide. So thank you for listening. Thank you to the National Lottery Heritage Fund and Back from the Brink for funding work at RSPB Sherwood, and also to Buglife for their support with the Ancients of the Future project. And that's Izi and mine contact details there as well, should you need them. Thank you.
Many thanks, Carl, for that. If any of you out there have not been to Sherwood Forest, then I heartily recommend you go and take a look there. It's an amazing place, lots of interesting trees there, and loads of interesting invertebrates to find. Now, what we're going to do now, we're going to go through to, we're going to have a bit of a Q&A for the next 10 minutes. Some of the questions have already come through on the system. One here from Matt Wainhouse. This is really for Alice. So Matt says, it's great to see horse chestnut getting some credit. The received wisdom of habitat restoration is plant native. With horse chestnut being a 16th century interloper, do you think we need to radically rethink planting advice? Alice, this one's for you.
That's a good one. I mean, certainly from our point of view, we would say that if we have rare species that are just using horse chestnut, it'd be really interesting to know if perhaps they would use other species of tree, because presumably before horse chestnut, then they must have done. But I think for the time being, if we only know they're on horse chestnut, then yes, our advice would be to plant horse chestnut. But yeah, that opens up a big can of worms of what is acceptable planting or not. I mean, I would suggest in other sites where there aren't species that need horse chestnut, I think native is probably best. But yeah, it's a difficult one.
Yeah. While you're there as well, Alice, there's also a question from Kathy Meakin. Hello, Kathy. She wants to know a little bit about the history of Mockers Park. Now, I don't know if you know anything about that. I think all the old parkland was associated with estates and houses back in the day, but I'm not sure about Mockers Park. Do you know
unfortunately, I haven't worked at Mockers at all. I'm just delivering this presentation, so I'm ashamed to say I actually don't know the history. But I expect it's been parkland for with a house or estate or something like that. Some of my other colleagues, certainly from Plant Life, will probably know the answer much better than that.
Okay. And then moving on to Carl and Izi, a question here from Eric Yanker. Presumably, veterinised trees are sacrificial and are not expected to survive into old age.
Do you want me to take that, Carl?
Yeah, if you could, please, Izi.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I mean, we don't really know the answer to that because we never really know the answer with trees. But yes, they are part of the sacrificial areas. We've primarily chosen younger oak plantations where we would be doing traditional woodland thinning. So rather than felling all the trees that we are going to selectively thin, we've decided to veterinise some of them, and we've been able to do that because of this project and the funding that Back from the Brink has provided. And the exciting thing for us is that now we've started that process. We've been looking for funding from elsewhere to carry on that process. There's been another question about public reaction to it, and whilst you might think public reaction would be negative, it's actually been really positive. People have been really engaged with the fact that we are replicating these natural features within this younger age tree, and it's helping them to understand the importance of the features and why these ancients are so amazingly important. And it's almost like a live interpretation technique as well as creating homes for all sorts of wildlife. So it's double-edged. So we're very grateful. We're very grateful to Vicky for starting it off, and you'll find out more about that from her presentation later.
While you're there, Izzy, as well, there's another question from Andy Jones that also relates to what you've just said.
I've seen that one.
Oh, okay, yeah, about veterinisation, and if you only do it in sort of places without public access. Now, what do you do with respect to
Yeah, so we have targeted areas that are close to public access but don't have direct paths through them. So again, people can see the work that's been happening from the paths, but they don't actually go into those areas particularly. Sherwood it's not open access, but it's fairly open access. But I get the point that we are, we are intervening with those trees as opposed to natural processes. So therefore the risk is enhanced. But Sherwood is that sort of a site. It's, where the emphasis is on the trees. Rather than it purely being on public safety. People have an awareness when they come to Sherwood that, this is a site where you've got to be mindful that you're in an ancient forest.
Okay. Stay there, Izzy, you're in demand. There's a question here also from James Sears. I don't know if you can see this one. How will you be monitoring the use of aerial cavities given their height?
Vein traps.
Okay, vein traps. And then there's also a question from Steph Skip. Hello, Steph. She says, have you had any thoughts on how you'll be sampled the beetles from your beetle boxes? She said she's been getting good results using winkler extraction traps.
Oh,
this is a niche beetle question.
Niche beetle question.
Do you want me?
Yes, please, Carl. Yeah.
Yeah, so we've been talking to a local coleopterist expert and taking him around to show them, and it'd be good to chat to Steph as well about things. One of his thoughts was just taking out the material, sifting through it, and then putting it back in again. So we're sort of in the process of developing a full sampling methodology for the beetle boxes. But yeah, it'd be good to liaise with Steph about that. But they were his current thoughts.
Okay. One question from me is that you mentioned that the limited abundance of 200 to 300-year-old trees. Now, is there any idea on the sort of natural attrition rate of those trees? I mean, what proportion of them can you expect would become veterans? Is anything known about that or not?
No, that's next phase, if you like, Ross. We've tagged them. We've done an initial habitat survey on them. But that's one of our next focus areas. We'd like to do some genetic testing to see if there's any link between the ancients and the next gens in terms of natural regen, or whether or not they are all part of a planting program, because that might affect their longevity. There are, some of the trees are wonderful. Some of them have got amazing veteran features already, and some of them are just good, solid trees that will develop in time. When we say they're limited, I'm certainly aware that we're a lot better off than a lot of Parfitt situations. So I'm not unduly worried, but it's always good to have tools in your armory to help bridge those gaps, because there are gaps. There's no denying that. But I think we've got to appreciate that tree time is very different to human time. So, a generation can span sort of 200, 300 years in its own right. So I think there is time for those trees to play catch up. Okay. I don't think it's a doomed situation.
Okay.
If Thanks, I can Izzy. Come in.
Sorry, Carl. Do you want to add something, Carl?
I was just going to say it's also important that we think about the RSPB reserve in a wider context. So the SAC and NNR is much bigger, and certainly to the west, where we've got some areas where unfortunately things were cut down in the past and conifer plantations were put in. So in the surrounding area, we probably do have even fewer trees than the concentration we find. So certainly at a landscape scale, it's potentially an issue.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you very much for the speakers for this first session.